I think RevOps has become a buzzword, and a lot of times people don't understand it or they use it incorrectly. To me, like the simplest way that I describe it or define it, it's like getting insights into the hands of frontline people so they can make decisions to drive revenue. That's what RevOps is all about. And there's lots of ways you can do it. There's obviously lots of different types of data. And the art is getting the right data to the right rep at the right time so they can make a decision that's going to help them close a deal or make an email campaign that has a higher open rate or whatever the metric is.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell
and Amy Weaver. In today's episode, Chris Baribeau, the Senior Director of Customer Success at HubSpot, shares his suggestions for professional services firms to grow revenue by leveraging their data.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And I think the one question that I'd like to dive straight into is, from your perspective, what goes into your decision to implement new technology within an organization? And again, not to respond to this from a HubSpot, what you would do as HubSpot, but what you would do from all the HubSpot customers that you've seen and the businesses that you've experienced prior to and in your time at HubSpot. So what does it take? How long does it take to fully, implement and have teams adopt new technology?
Great question. So I've been kind of thinking about this very deeply for many, many years. And at all the different, not all, but most of the different companies I've worked at, and I've had hundreds of different clients across my, different roles at different companies. I think one of the common challenges are that when there is a problem identified, people immediately say, great, let's implement X technology. Let's go buy this software and set it up. And of course, you need the technology, right? You need some sort of or multiple pieces of technology to solve your problem. But a lot of times people jump right into the technology without clearly defining the business problem, the process, the metrics, the solution, and then going into, okay, what is the right technology to meet our problem? So just like good examples, a lot of times people call projects the system project, whatever the name of the software vendor is. When that's not really what they're doing. The project is all about how do we optimize our lead flow, or how do we drive efficiencies in our conversion pipeline, and then say this is the right software to do that for us. So I know this isn't a revolutionary thought, but still in 2024, even in my current place of employment, we just jump right into the technology without starting to really clarify what is the process and how do we want this to work and what are the requirements, and then finding the right technology to solve that problem. So when that first piece is done right, the technology adoption goes a lot smoother and it works, it meets the user's needs, and the adoption's a lot higher. So that to me is like the critical success factor is don't just like try to find a piece of technology and implement it, really understand what the process should look like and your requirements, and then pick the right software to meet those for you.
Chris, can you think of one or two examples of, sort of mistakes that have been made that you've been part of or that you've seen more specifically that, versus just jumping straight into technology and skipping past, the process and data aspects and the training aspects? One or two examples of mistakes that you've seen made more specifically?
Yeah, we're working on a project right now. It's our own product. It's our service product, and we have access to it. So we have a business problem around how do we better handle customer escalations of a certain type. And immediately the answer is, let's just use our service hub and let's set it up and let's use this ticket function and let's just do it. And of course, the product is very capable. It's definitely going to solve our problem. But we ended up with this process where, I asked my team, so how many of these types of escalations did we get and how much did they cost us? we couldn't answer the question because we didn't design the process the right way. We just went right into the software and said, great, let's just use this. Let's use this function. Let's set up these fields this way. And, it works, but it doesn't give us the answers that we need. So typically, like I said earlier, when you don't start with what are the objectives and the metrics that we want to be able to measure when this project is done, you're not going to get them unless they're just the most simple basic metrics. So I'm kind of unwinding a situation right now where we went right into the technology, and the very simple questions I want answered, I can't get the answers to because we didn't design the process right. So we're having to go back and redesign it. There's nothing wrong with the software. We just didn't build the process right in a way to answer the business questions that we have. So happens all the time. A lot of times, metrics are things that people think about after. Great, we've got the system built, we got the data integrated. What kind of reports do you want? Well, that usually needs to be the first question or one of the first questions that you ask. So you put the data in the right place and you design the process so you can get the answers that you want. That's the most common example where I see the technology didn't fail. It just didn't give the business customers the answers that they needed.
Right. Yeah. Now we hear that a lot. And I guess in most cases, and I'd like to get your input on this, is would you say that it can depend on whether metrics or KPIs are addressed first, or whether you address the process first? And or could it so could it be different? Could you start with process and then go to metrics and KPIs, or do you think it really makes sense to start with metrics and KPIs first and then move on to process?
Yeah, it's a good question. They can kind of happen in parallel, but I'm always of the believer. I've been studying and working in RevOps for a long time. Just the framework of objectives, metrics, data, and then you go into people, process, and technology. So what that means is define the objective of the project, which is usually most people do that. But then going through the metrics, what things do I want to measure, or what do I want to be able to track or report on? And then once you have those clearly defined, you say, great, what data then do I need to get those metrics? And then once you have that identified, then you can start working on the process and figuring out what people need to be involved and then what systems and technology. So I think the metrics need to come really early on, because otherwise you'll have a process that may run really efficient, but you're not going to get the outputs or the insights that you need. And that's really the whole point of RevOps, is to make sure that you're putting the insights in the hands of the users that they're going to need to drive revenue or drive conversations with customers. So I think metrics are pretty key to get those defined up front. And I think what you're suggesting, which I see all the time, people start with process. So once they get through they actually start with technology, as I said before, but their next step is then process, and metrics kind of happen at the end when those really need to come first.
Yeah. I mean, in our experience and in the work that we do, we really, if it's up to us, we always start with metrics or KPIs, because until, to your point, if you don't know what the business problem is that you're driving towards, well, you need to know what the business problem is you're driving towards. And the only way to know that you're working towards that is that you can measure something towards it, right? Which are metrics or KPIs. So we always start with KPIs, metrics, data, reporting, everything in that category. And then we move on to process to make sure that the processes are going to support the data flow that ultimately works up to solving that business problem in a measurable way, before we then start looking into implementing the technology to make it all go better and faster.
So if I could just add one more thing to that. So another technique that I use, I actually many years ago managed a marketing team, and the marketing team taught me about learning plans. So when they run campaigns, obviously you want to generate clicks, opens, conversions, but they also want to learn. Is this creative resonating with this audience? And they created learning plans for every campaign and project that they do. And I've adapted that and say, even though we're not doing marketing campaigns, if we're doing technology implementation or we're building a business process, we need to have outcomes and metrics, but what's our learning plan? What do we want to learn about during this pilot? Even if we hit our numbers and we achieve our metrics and our revenue goals, that's okay, but what are we learning? And really forcing the teams to think about those learnings. And they don't all have to be hard numbers, but just getting into the process of thinking about what do I want to measure and what do I want to learn at the very beginning of the project, and then going to build it and then checking back on your learnings. It's like I said, I didn't start doing that until I started working with marketers. It's just an uncommon or unnatural process to think about learnings like so early on in a project. And I think teams and companies that do that, build that into their process early on, see a lot more success.
Well, I'm seeing it as another positive outcome of the effort and the investment that you're making, both from the software perspective and also the time getting people trained and adopted. Like you're getting that much more out of it if you have some takeaways in addition to those metrics.
Exactly. Exactly. And the takeaways are exactly what you're going to need to refine or improve whatever program or process that you're trying to solve in the first place. Absolutely.
You'll take those learnings and then you'll optimize.
Yeah. Chris, and then you mentioned, as you were in your previous response, you started talking about RevOps, which of course is something that we talk about a lot, especially not just on the podcast, which is called RevOps Champions, but in our day-to-day work, because a lot of our services that come post implementation are grouped in the category of RevOps consulting and support. Sort of bringing you back to your professional services days, and we're going to be seeing more of this tomorrow at the event. So a lot of these mid-market professional services consulting firms, when we first talk to them and mention RevOps, they're like, well, sorry, we have no idea what you're talking about. And the reason we keep talking about RevOps is because we know that it's a go-to-market model and something that you can use to have a more efficient and aligned business. And when by the end of a conversation with somebody who didn't know what RevOps was at the beginning of the conversation, at the end, pretty much every single time they go, oh, well, yeah, we do pretty much 70 or 80% of what you're talking about. We just don't call it that. How would you explain RevOps again now to a mid-market professional services firm who doesn't think of RevOps in the way that a lot of SaaS companies, SaaS, pretty much every single SaaS company knows what RevOps is, but professional services and manufacturing companies don't. How would you explain RevOps to those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think RevOps has become a buzzword, and a lot of times people don't understand it or they use it incorrectly. To me, like the simplest way that I describe it or define it, it's like getting insights into the hands of frontline people so they can make decisions to drive revenue. That's what RevOps is all about. And there's lots of ways you can do it. There's obviously lots of different types of data. And the art is getting the right data to the right rep at the right time so they can make a decision that's going to help them close a deal or make an email campaign that has a higher open rate or whatever the metric is. Now, going back to like professional services firms, so in my experience, like everyone's trying to do that, right? Everyone's trying to put data in the hands of their reps. But I actually find that a lot of professional services firms are sitting on like gold mines of data that they don't even know that they have, or they don't know how useful it is going to be to their reps. So, everyone knows, they have deal information, opportunity information, they have kind of pipeline information. But especially when you think about like in professional services, in that industry, you're not acquiring thousands of customers. You've got tens or dozens or a small number of customers that you're doing large, long-term, multi-year projects and engagements with. And a lot of the way you grow your business is by selling more services or continuing engagements with your existing customers rather than like at HubSpot, we have over 200,000 customers. Very different model. So what I find a lot of professional services companies struggle with is like accessing the information they have about their customers. How are the projects going? Who are the decision makers? What are some of the key attributes about those engagements? What are the challenges that are coming up during the project? So getting the information from the team of consultants or professional services practitioners who are working with the customers and finding ways to surface that to the business development teams. And of course, that requires a lot of technology. So you don't want your professional services consultants tracking every last bit of detail. Like that's never going to work. But if you have structured project plans, project management processes, if you have information about their customers or especially their CRM, like linking project data with CRM data is extremely powerful. So you have your contacts, you have the people making the decisions, you know how the projects are going, you know when they're not going well, when they're going well and they're put on hold. And getting that information kind of out of the heads of the people on the ground and surfacing that to the business development function or the team that's responsible for like growing and developing the account. Right now it's like conversations and slide decks, but as you kind of try to scale it, a lot of that information is available in a system somewhere. And the challenge again is like, how do you structure those frontline systems so you can capture information that's helpful from a business development perspective, and then get it integrated into a CRM, which your business development folks are usually working in. And that's what I've seen when companies are able to do that. Like they're really able to develop like deeper relationships and expand their existing accounts rather than spending like all their time trying to acquire brand new customers.
Yeah, there's the capturing data component, and then it's the visibility to the people who can make better decisions because of their access to it. For sure.
Yeah. And I think it's like the other key point of that is it's data about the projects. It's not just your name and email and company size. It's information about the project that you're working on, the status, the lots of information in the project plan that's extremely useful to surface that up and aggregate it. Because a lot of times professional services companies work in different pockets of a company. You'll find a department that needs a project, another department, and a lot of that's like not brought together unless you have like a principal who's kind of got their hands in like everything. And that's not as scalable as if you're able to kind of see the status and see information about the projects and roll that up in a system and kind of alert someone to say, hey, there's an opportunity to go talk to this customer, or this project went really poorly, have you followed up with them recently? Even simple things like that. Getting the project data into your CRM is really where the professional services companies who are serious about RevOps like see the biggest opportunity and the biggest impact.
Yeah. We actually, I mean, this is a very common challenge that we see across professional services firms, because again, a lot of them, the business development function is very separate from, because a lot of them have this, what we call the seller doer model, where the engineer or the consultant or the architect is the one selling the work as well as doing the work, right? And to your earlier point, they don't have the time to then go and connect all the dots in the back between the work that they're doing and that their colleagues can do. In fact, we were just having a conversation this morning around, if an engineering firm has a city as a client, but there's one engineer who works with the water department, and they've been doing that for 4 years and they do incredible work. But that city also has roads and bridges and all kinds of other things that their colleagues do, and they're seeing problems, but they're not talking about it internally. Where he could go to his colleague, who's the engineer, who could focus more on the roads and bridges, et cetera, to say, oh well, by the way, we had a meeting yesterday with the city of XYZ, and there's an opportunity there, and hopefully we have all that data somewhere already, so that when we have that initial conversation, we're coming to the table with already some momentum and some insight, right? So I really like the way you position that.
Yeah. One other thing about that I found for like really successful professional services firms is the way they use their website. So a lot of professional services firms kind of view a website as almost like a phone book, right? Here's my company information, here's information about my team, and here's how to contact us, and maybe here's like 3 or 4 of our service offerings. It's almost like a brochure. But the services firms that really kind of stand out is they use their website as a branding thought leadership piece. So using your example of the engineers who are working with the city, I forget which city you mentioned, to do all kinds of public works projects, there's a lot of like thought leadership out there that's needed. So maybe I'm not an expert in that area, but maybe it's like new regulations and zoning laws, or maybe there's like some new materials that have been developed that make projects 20% cheaper or more environmentally friendly. A lot of professional services firms don't really think about putting that content like front and center. And the ones that do actually create a premium brand for themselves. So companies are finding their websites not because they're looking for a services firm, but because they want to learn about how do I make my project more efficient, or what are the new laws that I have to worry about? And they can start coming to that services firm as a knowledge base for like the industry. And they'll go there, they'll come back, and eventually when they're ready to do a project, they're going to go to that firm. So if these companies are able to use their website more than just a, hey, fill out this form if you need some contact information, but as a thought leadership piece and a place to share their perspectives, the website's become a really powerful marketing tool where you can start seeing that, wait a minute, there's like 10 people from the same company that keep coming back to our website, and they come back all the time and they're downloading this kind of content. That tells you there's something going on, and that's a good opportunity for you to obviously follow up with that customer. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of the mid-size professional services firms just don't see their website like that. And you don't need to have hundreds of pieces of content. You just need to have a couple perspectives that are relevant, and publish it and use that as thought leadership. And that's going to draw in audiences. And honestly, what I found, I worked for one of these customers was my client. Their existing customers were some of the biggest, the most frequent audiences on their website, because they would come and they'd want to learn about this new area, and the team on the ground didn't even know it. They didn't even know their existing customer was looking at this this thought leadership piece that their company put out. So if you don't have a CRM where all those data points are put together, you're missing opportunities. So obviously the answer would be someone who's overseeing that account would say, hey, this project's going awesome. We're on time. We're ahead of schedule. And I notice you're interested in this new X, Y, and Z. Let's have a conversation about that. That's a really powerful way to develop an account if you're able to collect those different data points and bring them together. So like I said, professional services firms, you don't need a library of hundreds of pieces, but find something that you're an expert at, and publish it and keep it up to date. And people will come to your site, and you'll be able to use your website as a really powerful demand generation engine.
And of course, coming back to the data use in that particular case, of course, you could set up lead scoring in the same way that you set up lead scoring for net new clients or customers. You can do the same thing with existing clients, where if an existing client to your example, if they're coming back to the same page on a particular thought leadership piece multiple times, and and you can decide what makes the most sense. Is it the fifth time, the sixth time, the seventh time? It then automatically triggers the thought leader or someone on their team to say, okay, this particular client has now visited that page the number of times that we set that lead trigger on. Maybe somebody should just reach out and whether it's an email or a lunch or whatever makes most sense in that particular business, just as a touch point to see whether there's something there.
Yeah, exactly. It's just connecting all the different channels that a customer interacts with your brand. It's whether it's face-to-face meetings with your practitioners, whether it's project status meetings, whether it's online behavior, getting all that together in a centralized view. Again, back to how I define RevOps, is like getting the insights into the hands of reps so they can make decisions to drive revenue. It's collecting all that data and saying, hey, this customer looks like they're about to do something interesting. Why don't you have a conversation with them about that, and connecting the dots? That's really the nirvana of RevOps. Now, making that happen isn't as easy as it sounds. And that's kind of where we go back to, well, you have to have a really clear business problem of like, what are you trying to solve? We're not just trying to build a website to drive hundreds of thousands of page views. That may be what you want to do, but really what you want to do is attract the right type of audience and then match that data with what you have about your existing customers, so you can help penetrate and grow your customers based on like what they're doing on your website, what they're interested in, what they're telling you that they want to do that they're not doing. Or maybe they're going deep on the content that's relevant to the project you're working on with them right now. That's a really, really good sign that they're invested in their area and in your perspective. And you could use some of that thought leadership pieces in your executive steering committees, or however you conduct your client engagement meetings. Like, you could bring some of that content into those face-to-face discussions and really make those experiences like more just higher impact.
Yeah. Well, it ties in really nicely with your role as a customer success director, I think, because you are directly impacting the success of both the client projects working with HubSpot, but just their overall success in what they're trying to do for their business. And if you don't mind, I want to take us on a tiny bit of a tangent related to that. Prior to director of customer success, you were a director of customer experience. And I'm curious what changes happened in your role as the result of that title change. And how do you guys internally at HubSpot differentiate between the experience of the customer and their success?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like most companies, there are organization changes and titles change. So my role didn't change substantially as the title changed, but I can talk about a lot of what I was and am focused on that has both an experience and a success title. At some companies, they're called the same thing, some they're different. But what a big part of my responsibility is to make sure that we're providing the right experience end to end across the customer's journey. And if you think about how most companies are structured, they have a sales function, and they stop once the customer signs a contract. And then we have like some sort of onboarding or implementation team. And then we have a success team. And then we have a support team. And then maybe there are some like other like back office teams around like billing or contract management. And they're all kind of separate functions. And companies organize themselves to say, look, if we're going to have 200,000 customers, we need to make sure we have a very tight, very well structured support team or professional services team. And they kind of build their orgs around those functions. And what ends up happening is the focus becomes more about how do I make my function efficient rather than how am I solving for the customer experience. So what my role has been is to look across that whole experience and say, look, hey, there's a gap here. We need to have a much better connection between pre-sale and implementation, as an example. Separate team, separate VP, separate metrics, but the customer, they're talking to a sales rep one day, the next day they're talking to their implementation person. It's not a different, it's the same to them. They look at it as, hey, great, now I'm ready to start using the product. Why do I have to start from scratch? Why do I have to repeat myself? How come all the goals and objectives and even the demo and the proof of concept that I spent months working on, why do I have to start that from scratch? So solving kind of holes like that where the company has like structured itself to have a very good sales function and a very good service function, but there's handoffs or sharp edges between those functions that cause an unoptimal experience sometimes. So that's really kind of what I've been focused on for my tenure at HubSpot. Another good example would be customers that have been with us for a long time, and they have a lot of product, they've seen a lot of success, but they somehow end up getting stuck because they're trying to solve a new technical problem that they haven't done in the product before, or they have a new person that comes on board, or they've got the mandate to consolidate and like rationalize their tech stack. But the result is like they need some help that's different than the help that they've been getting. So they'll be working with a customer success manager, and they have a very qualified and great team that's helping them along. But this new need that they have, they're not going to have that need forever. They need some expert technical help. And some customers are willing to pay for that. But a lot of customers are like, well, I'm not getting value from this product, and it's not doing what you promised me, and I need you to help me. And we don't necessarily have a way to support that within our structures. So what we did is we created a separate team of solutions architects, and they're aligned with like our largest, most strategic accounts. And they're not just spending time with all the accounts and doing all kinds of free work. Like, they're getting engaged at the right point where we have a high value of customer who has this moment of need where we know if we help them over that hump, their usage and their adoption is going to go way up and their loyalty is going to be much higher. So let's invest a little bit. Let's help make that experience better. And that's going to be better for the customer, and it's going to help them stay on the platform more. So those are just like two examples of like sharp edges or gaps in the experience that my team has been solving, and helping our customers do that as well.
Yeah. How would you say you guys are able to help customers who are growing rapidly, and so they're needing to scale their processes, maybe add headcount? Do you ever run into those kind of situations?
Yeah, I mean that's the ideal customer, is when their
Right?
business is growing
More
with
seats.
HubSpot. Absolutely, yeah, more
Yeah.
seats. But the challenge is, it's not just about like adding more. Let's use the seats example. Of course, if you have more people, you need to add more seats. But like, how do you properly get those new people? Like, I don't even like the word training, because training is just one part of it. So you have to get them trained on the tool, but what you really have to train them on is the business process. So every customer has their own sales process and the way they manage deals and their different stages and statuses and all the rules and the way that customers move through the funnel. HubSpot is a product that can support almost any model, but you set it up and you customize it based on your business process. So what a lot of companies do is they just train people on the software and say, great, HubSpot's super easy to use. Watch this video and learn how to use the tool. And then, great, here's your seat. Go make all your calls and hit your number. And what they're failing to do is say, great, you got to learn how to use HubSpot first. It's super easy. It won't take you that long. But let's talk about this business process and when you're supposed to use these fields and how you can use these really powerful sales acceleration tools. And when you know that a deal is moved from this stage to that stage, and what the graduation criteria are, and basically like teaching them the business process that has been designed in HubSpot, so that they understand how to use the software, but more importantly, how to use their job. And then they'll actually be able to take advantage of all the efficiencies and the benefits and the revenue driving capabilities of the platform.
They understand the customer's journey at that point, because the customer is going through the stages, on their own as they're guiding them through, in your sales example.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all, again, we've talked a lot about this. Like, it wraps into RevOps. It's about the metrics and the process. So like, if you're able to make sure let's use the example of like, you've got 30 new sales reps that you want to put onto HubSpot. They have to understand the process that was built in HubSpot, because whoever implemented HubSpot did so in a way to make the sales process a lot more efficient, and maybe consolidated 3 or 4 road processes across a company into one standardized process. You've got to teach that to the rep, and then you have to teach them how to use the tool. And when both of those happen, adoption gets really, really high, because they're able to see how they can use the tool to do their job, not just of, hey, here's this great piece of software that I don't know how to use it to do my job. I just know what each feature function does. So it's really about like teaching them that how their business process has been put into HubSpot, and helping them really understand that. That's where the adoption is the highest that we see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and what we're seeing, sort of an extended example of that more and more, is how companies, because as they're growing rapidly, their processes are having to change too, right? So as you're adding people and you're adding revenue, and of course with the revenue, of course, comes customers. That has an impact on your processes, and there will be sharp edges in your processes that then have to be updated. And then, of course, as soon as you're updating a process, which often also then impacts the data, it might or might not affect the data that you're tracking, but it absolutely impacts a change that has to be then made in the CRM or whatever technology it is that you're using as part of that process. You then have to go and update the technology to reflect the updated process, which of course is, again, especially if you're growing, is changing continuously. Um, and you, Chris, you talked about, you because I know this is something that we talk about a lot as well. You and I, and also here at Dynamico internally a lot about is you mentioned training as just one component of a successful implementation and a successful continued use of a tech stack that drives the correct outcomes, data, processes. I think really what it comes down to is that every time you make a change in some part of the organization, whether it's adding headcount or adding customers, at some point it's going to impact a change, or it's going to necessitate a change in your processes, and potentially a change in your data, and therefore a change or an update to the technology stack, or the tools that are being used by the teams in that function or cross-functionally. So it's this continuous, improvement, and how we've sort of I was coming back to, we talk about how change management is a critical thing, but we don't actually talk about change management as a service or a thing. We think of it as process improvement, because sort of exactly what we're talking about now is how, if you have a process that needs to change, how do you make that change? Again, very, very systematically, what is necessitated to change, what needs to change, and then go and implement the change, and then train the people on why, first of all, why the change was made and how it's going to, help them in their jobs going forward because of the change. So again, what we hear a lot on RevOps Champions podcast is the communication piece of that is so critical, because again, whenever there's change and process and improvement, you have to let everybody know why it is that we're doing this, and how everyone's going to benefit from the change, because a lot of us are very open to change, a lot of us are not as open to change. So but if you frame it in the right way, and that everybody sees the benefit in their day-to-day and the benefit to the business, then it's a lot easier to get there and make that adoption happen.
Yeah, and I think going back to kind of your audience of like mid-sized professional services firms, I think like the inflection point is, whether you call it a RevOps job or not, like that needs to be somebody's job to do that. It can't be, 4 or 5 different roles that say, look, I'm going to make this change to the process and send out an email to the sales team and tell them to now do this new thing. Someone's got to be responsible for making sure all the process and the data stays consistent and clean. And then when a change needs to happen, that it gets built correctly from a technical perspective, and then that it gets rolled out to the sales team. Now, the challenge that a lot of sales teams has is they're getting just bombarded with information. A lot of it has nothing to do with the software. It's new sales rules, new product updates, pricing discounts, new recarves, like all these things that sales reps are just information overload. And the last thing they want to know is, great, now I have to use these 2 new fields. And when the deal gets here, I have to click this button or whatever the process change is. So that has to be done in a very thoughtful way. So it's not just like, hey, here's the weekly update, and by the way, here's like a new process for you. Just because of the amount of information that's coming at reps. So like if you have somebody or a team who owns the change management of the system, they can partner with the team that owns the change management of helping reps sell, integrate those two together. And ideally you can say, the reason we're making this change in the process, or the reason we're asking you to capture this new information or do something different from a systems perspective, is because it supports the way we're trying to go to market with this new product that we're trying to help you sell. And connecting the system changes with the sales motions. When that happens, the sales reps, no one likes change, but they understand and they see it as one change rather than 2 individual process changes. And it's much easier to, like you said, to understand why and adopt. So again, have someone whose job it is to centralize and coordinate the change, and then align that with the team that's putting the rest of the change on the sales team on how they can sell better. And when those 2 things connect, that's when adoption is highest from a systems perspective.
You guys, all of this talk of change, we haven't touched on how the product itself that these teams are using is evolving all the time too. And I want to make sure that we get to that. So the business grows, there's new headcount, you've changed your processes to support adding these new employees, or a new product, line of business, that sort of thing. But what about when the tool you're using is evolving itself? And I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about like AI being incorporated into a lot of these software products and how companies are needing to make those changes to take advantage of new AI tools.
Yeah, it's a great point. So at HubSpot, we are very fast, very early adopters of AI just everywhere in our product and even in our internal processes. So like our philosophy right now, and it'll probably stay this way for a little while, is number one, experiment with AI in every way you possibly can. Micro use cases. You don't have to have this overarching company-wide AI strategy. That will eventually emerge. But think about where you can inject AI into even the smallest step in the process and get some efficiency. So we've done that in our product. We've got sales intelligence, we've got conversation summarization, we've got a lot of tools that our customers can use in the product to help them. But even internally, what we're doing is we're trying to find a way to make it easier for our sales reps to do their job so they don't have to spend as much time administering and tracking data and summarizing calls and reviewing, the whole account history. We're trying to take that work away so that our reps can spend more time talking to customers, understanding their problems, positioning our product and solutions. And of course, there is still some amount of time that has to be spent on the administrative part of the job. Like that's where we're starting to see AI really have an impact. And it's happening in a couple ways. So number one, it's certainly driving efficiency. So like less manual work, less note taking, less kind of perusing the account. Like we're providing like really robust summaries of like what's happened on the account, and even bringing in data sources like external. So what's happening, we read their 10Ks and we kind of summarize that information. We look at press releases and we put all that information in the hands of a rep so they can get on the phone and have a really intelligent conversation with the customer. And the second part is like making intelligent recommendations. So not just saying, here's what happened on this account since you talked to them last. Here are 3 things we think you could talk to them about based on all this information that we've now collected. So AI is becoming a really powerful way to drive productivity, but more importantly, have the reps have more valuable conversations. And I think that's where we're going to see the biggest impact. Our approach for AI, and this is kind of an interesting perspective. I've had a lot of colleagues and peers in the industry that take a similar approach, but right now we're measuring adoption. So are reps using this new call summarization feature? Are they using this call script recommendation? And if they're using it, that means they're seeing value. And then once the adoption is high enough, then we're going to start measuring outputs. Does this call script recommendation, does that actually drive conversions? Right? So we're measuring like our reps using it, and we've got to make it as easy and as integrated into the workflow as possible. And once that happens, then we can say, great, now reps are using it. Is it actually driving higher conversions, more follow-up calls, whatever the metric is? So it's like put the AI wherever you can, solve small problems, measure adoption, because if we can get reps to use it, they're going to see value. And then you can start to optimize it to drive like higher conversions or higher results. So that's kind of like our philosophy for how we're thinking about introducing like new tools to our sales reps to make their job easier and to give them more time to sell.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.